I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor here at Gold Derby with Emmy winner Gavin Thurston, Cinematographer Extraordinaire on Netflix's David Attenborough, A Life on Our Planet. First of all, Gavin, this is a really personal and intimate statement from someone who's so associated with the natural world for decades. But this time it's him, Sir David Attenborough, staring down the barrel of the camera and being so honest and open about what he's seen and what he's learned. So I was wondering, from your perspective, was there a newfound intentional intimacy or sincerity about how you approached shooting this film as opposed to previous productions with Sir David Attenborough?
Well, as you probably know, most of the things that David has done in the past have been, very tightly scripted. They're following usually wildlife stories, natural history stories. And this is more, he's quite a personal man. He's quite a private man, David. So this is the first time I think he's been much more open about his own emotions and thoughts. He's had 93 years on this planet and he's witnessed a lot of things. And generally, he hasn't been outspoken about things in the past unless he knows categorically, he can argue something against the world experts. And this is one thing where obviously he has huge experience all this time on the planet. He's seen how it was, how we've screwed it up basically, and how we can fix it. And it's amazing to have him, as you say, tell us personally, straight down the lens, how it was, how marvelous it was, all the mistakes we've made, but how we can fix it.
Yeah, I mean, often we hear his mellifluous voice. It's such a recognizable voice with your beautiful photography. But we don't often get to see him like this, a talking head, telling us how it is. And I would assume that just makes life a bit simpler for you, but surely it can't just be a matter of just plonking a camera down in a room and walking away. So what did it involve? Was there anything that you were thinking about in trying to make those parts of the film at least more engaging?
Yeah, I mean, the key thing is obviously through David's career, he's always spoken to us as a viewer in our sitting rooms at home, so it's always straight to camera. So this had to be the same style, because if suddenly he's being interviewed and looking off camera, it doesn't engage you personally. And obviously it's a long film in terms of the words he has to say. So he worked very closely with Johnny Hughes and Colin Butfield to write the script for this. And obviously at 93, you can't remember a script. So we actually used an auto cue as such. I actually designed and built a specific auto cue to work with David. David tends to be very flamboyant and he'll move around and lean. And with traditional auto cues or, there's lots of different makes out there. If it's fixed on your matte bars, if he leans and you pan to reframe, then of course, then the reflection goes, then he's leaning further to try and read the words and so on. So that was the first thing, is I built a much bigger box that the camera was independent from the box, so I could actually reframe if necessary. And the next thing was for him to be able to read the thing. So we had at 93, obviously his eyesight's not as good as it was, maybe 50 years ago. So I had to make sure he had a really clear screen for that. And the other thing is at 93, you can't just sit down and read it in one sitting. So actually, I think we had 3 main sessions with him, which were kind of 3 to 4 hour sessions. And also as the filming progressed, stories were being updated. So actually the script was updated and the script was refined. So we might, go over and redo bits. But basically it is David's words, but just to make sure that the story flowed coherently and we didn't miss anything out and the facts were right, that's why we used the auto cue.
That's so fascinating. I would never have known that. And I look at him and think, wow, you look so sprightly for a 93-year-old legend. And I think a lot of that, I guess, has to do with all the things that you and your crew and team are doing behind the scenes, I guess, to make him look good, because we all just put him on such a pedestal. So about the film itself, I found it profoundly moving and an important film that I would really encourage everyone to watch and experience, because it juxtaposes thriving and dying biomes or ecosystems, and it's really quite confronting. So I wonder for you, given you worked on it, and you've had the distinct privilege of witnessing our natural world through your lenses for decades, how stark was that underlying message for you personally?
Well, I think the first clever thing about the film is it is a story about David's life. So the whole conservation message and the message to us and the recipe for fixing things is kind of cloaked in that really interesting story, seeing how it was in the 50s when he was traveling and it was being filmed in black and white. So that was a very clever mechanism for the film. And the second thing is these changes happen quite slowly, really. So people say to me, what are the worst things you've seen? There might be places I've been to many, many times. And each time you go back, the change is so incremental that it's not obvious. It's only really when we see things like those satellite images of, the Arctic ice melting and so on, done over 30 or 50 years, and you see it growing in winter, shrinking, growing, shrinking, growing, shrinking, that, if you compress 30 or 50 years, that you actually notice these things. And that's kind of what David's done with his own life. He can probably remember when he first went to Borneo. I mean, he describes it in the film that literally there was, forest at the horizon. And now, in fact, I went back with him for a film about 6-7 years ago. And we went along one of the same rivers that he went along all those years ago. And now, yes, you've got beautiful forest either side of the river. But if you actually hop up in a helicopter or send a drone up, that bit of forest is just a ribbon, maybe 200 meters deep. And beyond it is clear cut and palm tree. So again, sometimes I think we're cleverly shielded from the real damages. So, I mean, for me, I seriously think this is the most important film I work on in my career. And I do hope that when people, I mean, in fact, I've had so many, really kind and nice messages coming back from people. I mean, I was having 15, 20 messages a week, which I know, people somehow track me down saying, right, I've gone vegan, or no, I'm not going to drive my car, I'm going to cycle to work, or, people making, you might say sacrifices, but they're making lifestyle changes to be able to try and slow the damage that each individual's doing. So I mean, it's a very powerful message.
It really is. We all have a part to play, as small as we all are. It's a subject that means so much to me. I recall a previous Attenborough project where there are Australian scientists crying over the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef, and it's things like that I think we need to be reminded. And it's really good that we have your work to put it front and center. I wonder though, apart from this message of sustainability and climate change, why do you think Attenborough's work profoundly resonates with audiences as it does?
I think he's been on our screens for so many years, so many decades. I'd say when he first was on the screens in the UK, I think there was only one channel. There was BBC One, or there was BBC. So if you had a TV and you turned it on, chances are one of the programs you would watch, it wasn't 24-hour TV. It was probably 6 or 8 hours of scheduling a day, maybe in the early days. So he would be a face you become familiar with. And he took people on these amazing journeys to places you'd never dream of and show you creatures you could never imagine. And I think because he's never bullshitted, he's always given us the facts. He's never hyped anything up. He's just shown it how it is, but he's opened this door into the natural world. He's brought the natural world into our sitting room that over those decades, we've learned to trust him. So anything he tells us, quite rightly, we can believe, because he's not going to tell us something that isn't true. He's not going to hype something up. So I think when he tells us these things, it is fully engaging because we do believe him, and he isn't bullshitting, and the planet is in a real state. I mean, I'll be all right. I'll probably be dead by the time the shit really hits the fan, but my kids won't, and if they have children, my grandchildren won't. So I think we have a duty, even the older generation have a duty to try and correct some of the wrongs we've done through our lives.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a distinct lack of bullshit with him, and therefore that gives him credibility to say, listen, pay attention. Things are not going very well. We need to reverse course. Just thinking more generally about your career, I've always wanted to chat with you because I've seen so many of these productions and just thought, I can't believe my eyes. Well, I can't believe what I'm seeing. You've captured footage from the awe-inspiring to the devastating and everything in between. Maybe this is a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is it possible to pinpoint one shot or sequence that you will always remember as a genuine highlight of your career to date? Is that possible?
It's not possible, no. But I mean, I've got a whole list of sequences which, when I just think about being there and experiencing these things. Obviously, all you see is a two-dimensional image or set of images at the end. But actually being there and witnessing these things is always astounding. And one quite recently was for Netflix's Our Planet, which is obviously an Attenborough series on Netflix. And it was for the Shallow Seas program. It was actually used, part of the sequence was used for the opening of the series. And it's the mass bird feeding spectacle off the Chile coast.
Yeah.
So basically you have lots of nesting birds there. You have the most, well, you used to have the most abundant, waters with, just laden with fish, with all the nutrients coming up from Antarctica. And basically, of course, because you've got lots of fish, you can support lots of wildlife that eats it. I mean, the spectacle now, I mean, I think you can still see something like 5 million birds. You see flocks of 500,000, 1 million birds feeding in these feeding frenzies, and it's just extraordinary. And I think the sad thing about that is, yeah, it's amazing to see and be amongst it and film it. The sad thing is those sites would have been commonplace across the planet. You would have had examples on the Australia coast, you would have had examples, off the British coast, Iceland, all the way down the American coast. And because we've, literally, we've harvested so much from the ocean, we've got so efficient at catching fish, that's left, very little for the wildlife. So those spectacles are very, very rare now. But that's it was kind of one of those things where it was amazing and yet at the same time really sad that this wasn't happening all the way up the coast. It was like these few isolated pockets. So that was, a very memorable thing to witness. And I say, if you watch the series, Our Planet, hopefully you'll think the same when you see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's bittersweet, you're right, but that must have been such a pinch yourself moment, and I'm sure you have plenty of those. But that brings me to this. This is a slightly tongue-in-cheek question, but I imagine you've perfected the art of perseverance and patience out in the wild, and you've honed the art of observation. But do those skills actually make their way into your regular life, or are you like an extremely impatient person in your regular life?
What do you mean? Get on with it. Come on, you said 20 minutes.
Yeah.
The weird thing is lots of people say the same. They say, God, to be a wildlife cameraman or camerawoman, you must be so patient just to sit for hours and hours and wait for something to happen.
Yeah.
For me, I don't see it as a difficult thing to do. You're put in the most amazing places on the planet. And yes, you might be sat in a sort of meter by meter hide or blind, waiting for an event to happen. But while you're waiting for that event to happen, you're in, different paradises around the planet. So it's, you're waiting for a bird to lay an egg or a gorilla to turn up or something. But in the meantime, you're seeing birds and butterflies and flowers unfurl, and you're seeing all these other amazing things. I think what takes patience, I think I have the utmost respect for anybody who has to deal with people. So if you work in an information desk at a shopping mall, first thing in the morning, somebody comes up, oh, excuse me, where's the toilets? And you say, oh, just down on the right where it says toilets. The next person, oh, excuse me, where are the toilets? Just down there on the right. You imagine doing that day in, day out, every single day. Now, they have my respect. That takes patience.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's a very good perspective to have. You recently wrote a book called Journeys in the Wild, Secret Life of a Cameraman, and it features a foreword by Sir Attenborough himself. So talk us through about that book and how it came about.
Well, it was actually David who encouraged me to write it. So, traveling with him on and off for years and years. So I've been traveling with him now for over 32 years.
Yeah.
And on those shoots, you sit around for dinner or you're having a beer at the end of the day and you'd take and tell stories. And anyway, I remember one time he just said, people would say, God, you've got so many stories. You should write a book. It'd be great to hear all that, see all those stories in a book. And eventually I thought, yeah, bloody hell, I'll write a book. Anyway, so I remember this was about 15 years ago. I started to write a book. And I remember sitting down all enthusiastically, typing for about 2 hours. And I thought, right, grabbed a coffee and I thought I'll read it back. And I read it and it went, and then I went to Africa. It was hot. I liked it a lot. And I thought, oh my God, I cannot write. No. Anyway, so I gave up and then I tried again. I gave up. Anyway, every time I saw David, he'd say, how's that book coming along, Gavin? He said, if I'm still around when it's finished, he said, I'll write the foreword for it. That still wasn't encouragement enough. And I never did write it until I got a publishing deal out of the blue. Somebody offered me a book deal. And I wrote it. Anyway, I wrote to David saying that book, I'm writing it. I've got a book publication date. are you still up for writing the foreword for it? And he wrote a letter by return post saying, as a general rule, he won't write forewords for books, because obviously he must be asked, umpteen times a day. But he said, a promise is a promise, and yes, I will write the foreword. So I'm absolutely honoured that he did write it. And it's probably the only reason anybody other than my mother buys it, because they see his name on the front. Let's be honest.
Well, I mean, I think there'd be a lot of really awesome, juicy morsels of, encounters that you've had and so forth. So I think it's certainly a book that I'd like to add to my very long list of books that I'd like to read. But that being said, your work on in more recent productions has actually given you the opportunity to go to the Emmys. You won in 1996 for The Private Life of Plants, and then you received subsequent nominations for Planet Earth 2, Blue Planet 2, and Our Planet a couple of years ago. So I just wonder what those awards mean to you as, a working director of photography for many, many, many years. So be getting that recognition in the States, what's that like?
I think the first thing to mention is these programs, as we know, are a team effort. So it might be me, with my name on the envelope, but actually behind me are 40, 50, 60 people. Somebody comes up with the idea, somebody pays for it, somebody arranges the flights and the accommodation. There's a scientist who's done 40 years work who discovers the bits of behavior I'm filming. So I kind of feel it's a bit of a cheat, really. I mean, obviously it's an absolute honor when you get off, when you get nominated for these things. And the best thing is actually going to the awards is just meeting, the people you're up against and the people who do the same job, like-minded people. And that's one of the best things. I mean, the trophy itself, if you ever carry one home, obviously is a huge honor. But actually all the other parts of it, just being involved in the productions and so on, is in some way more powerful than that. But I would never say no to another nomination for an award. Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's just nice to be recognized that, we're competing on a world stage with all sorts of other talented people. And so to have your name as one of the last 4 or 5 is extraordinary.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, in that case, we hope to see you on the ballot in a few weeks' time, because your work on this particular film was really lovely and just a pleasure to watch. And thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.